Imagine waking up one morning and realizing the rules that control your life aren't logical. They're downright absurd. From prisons where silence is punished harder than violence, to schools where students must ask permission just to look out the window, to workplaces that fine employees for smiling too little or too much. These strange rules actually exist. Today, we're diving into the 50 weirdest, most bizarre, and unbelievable regulations ever enforced around the world. Get ready, because these rules will make your own life feel completely normal. In Japan's Fuchu prison, inmates once followed a bizarre rule. They had to sit, stand, sleep, and even breathe in perfect synchronization with the others in their block. Any tiny deviation, scratching early, blinking late, turning a fraction slower, was treated as rebellion. Guards believed uniform movement prevented riots. Prisoners described the silence as suffocating, the rhythm as mechanical, and the pressure to match every motion as mentally crushing, turning daily life into a strict human metronome. In South Korea, one school in Busan enforced a strange rule. Students were banned from wearing red ink anywhere on campus. Writing someone's name in red was considered a curse, believed to symbolically cut them from life. Teachers confiscated pens, inspected bags, and even issued detentions for accidental red markings. Students recalled how fear turned simple note-taking into a cautious ritual. The superstition became so strong that even test papers avoided red correction, creating an unusual academic environment built entirely on ancient belief. In Russia's Black Dolphin prison, one rule forces inmates to walk bent at a strict 90-degree angle whenever escorted. They must keep their eyes on the floor, hands behind their back, and respond instantly to commands. Guards claim the posture reduces surprise attacks, but prisoners say the rule feels like psychological domination. Hours of forced bending cause severe back pain, dizziness, and disorientation. Former inmates describe it as walking through life as a silhouette, never upright, never equal, always controlled by the institution's rigid choreography. A school in Kenya once implemented a bizarre rule. Students were not allowed to laugh during meals. Administrators claimed laughter disrupted digestion and encouraged reckless social behavior. Teachers patrolled the dining hall with sticks, ready to punish even a smile. Students learned to suppress joy, chewing silently like statues. Many recalled developing anxiety around eating in public long after graduation. The rule turned lunchtime, usually a break, into an emotionally tense ritual where the fear of accidental laughter overshadowed the comfort of food. In Norway, a corporate office introduced a shocking workplace rule. Employees had to log every restroom visit, including duration, in a digital tracker. Management claimed it prevented time theft, but workers saw it as humiliating surveillance. Some employees even received warnings for excessive urination. The policy caused national outrage after leaked logs showed people timing themselves to avoid penalties. Workers reported developing bladder anxiety, dehydration, and shame. The government eventually stepped in, calling it an unethical invasion of basic human dignity. In Thailand's Klong Prem prison, inmates once followed a rule forbidding talking during the first hour after waking. Silence was enforced with beatings. Prisoners had to line up, fold blankets, wash faces, and eat in total quiet. Guards believed early morning silence created obedience for the rest of the day. Many inmates said the rule felt spiritually suffocating, as if the prison stole their voice before the day even started. The hour became a haunting ritual where fear filled the space that words were forbidden to occupy. A school in China's Hubei province enforced a strange rule banning students from looking out the windows. Administrators claimed it distracted the collective mind and weakened discipline. Teachers taped paper over classroom glass, forcing students to stare only at the board. Anyone caught peeking during class received physical punishment. Students described the rule as mentally suffocating, like studying inside a sealed box. Many said they developed an obsession with the outside world precisely because the rule tried so hard to keep it hidden. In Texas, USA, a private company once enforced an extreme no perfume, no odor rule. Employees were required to smell completely neutral, no deodorant scents, no hair products, no lotion fragrances. Staff had to undergo weekly odor checks, where supervisors sniffed their clothing. The rule originally targeted allergies, but became a tool for control. Workers felt humiliated, stripped of personal identity, and constantly anxious about natural body smells. Some even stopped eating certain foods to avoid trace scents during the invasive inspections. In Brazil's Carandiru prison, one disturbing rule required inmates to maintain spotless cells using only water. No soap allowed. Authorities believed soap could be used as currency or melted into weapons. Prisoners scrubbed floors, walls, and toilets with bare hands, battling infections and foul smells daily. Cells stank in the tropical heat, creating unbearable living conditions. Former inmates said the rule wasn't about safety at all. It was about breaking spirits, forcing men to live in filth they were punished for failing to control. A school in France once had a strict rule banning students from bringing homemade lunches. Only cafeteria meals were allowed, even for children with allergies. The administration claimed it encouraged national nutritional unity, but parents saw it as absurd control. Students were forced to eat dishes they disliked, and some returned home hungry. The rule sparked protests when a child with dietary restrictions fell sick after eating mandatory food. The policy exposed how even well-intentioned rules can become oppressive when stripped of flexibility and empathy. In Singapore's Changi prison, inmates once followed an unsettling rule requiring absolute stillness during nightly head counts. Prisoners were forbidden to scratch, shift, or even adjust their breathing rhythm. Guards believed any movement meant concealed contraband. The room stayed silent except for footsteps and counting echoes. Many inmates said the psychological pressure felt heavier than physical punishment, knowing a tiny twitch could trigger hours of interrogation. The rule turned a simple roll call into a nightly ritual of fear, stiffness, and mental exhaustion. A school in Germany's North Rhine-Westphalia enforced a peculiar rule banning students from running during recess. Officials claimed fast movement increased competitive aggression. Teachers monitored playgrounds like traffic police, blowing whistles at any child who accelerated. Kids described recess as walking in circles, unable to release energy. Some developed rebellious habits, sprinting in hidden corners until caught. Psychologists criticized the rule for suppressing natural childhood behavior. Eventually, parents protested, arguing that banning running turned playtime into an emotional cage rather than a break. In China's Qingpu prison, inmates had to memorize and recite motivational corporate slogans every morning, including lines like, "Efficiency is virtue" and "Your failure harms the collective." The rule was meant to build workplace discipline, but prisoners described it as mental conditioning. Guards punished incorrect recitations with extra labor. Some inmates said the lines invaded their dreams, looping endlessly. The ritual blurred the line between prison and factory, turning daily life into a surreal chant of forced positivity wrapped in strict authoritarian control. In Italy, an office in Milan once created a strange policy requiring employees to greet every coworker by name each morning or face a written warning. Management claimed it built unity, but workers found it exhausting, especially in a team of over 60 people. People began carrying printed name lists to avoid forgetting anyone. Late arrivals caused chaos because greetings restarted. Employees described mornings as stressful performances, not productive beginnings. The rule, meant to encourage warmth, ultimately bred anxiety, resentment, and awkward social rituals. In Venezuela's San Antonio prison, inmates once enforced their own bizarre internal rule: mandatory participation in daily dance sessions. Led by powerful gang leaders, prisoners had to join reggae and salsa routines in the courtyard. Anyone who refused was punished by losing privileges or being publicly shamed. Leaders claimed dancing kept energy positive, but prisoners said it felt like forced celebration under threat. The unsettling mix of violence and music created an unpredictable environment where smiles were required, even when fear controlled everything beneath the rhythm. A school in Sweden's vast mainland region introduced an unusual rule banning students from erasing mistakes on paper. Teachers argued mistakes were historically educational and must remain visible. Students had to cross out errors with a single line, even in math exams, making pages cluttered and stressful. Some children said the rule made them afraid to write at all. The policy aimed to build resilience, but instead created anxiety around perfection. Parents protested after discovering notebooks filled with messy, unreadable corrections that undermined learning. In Philippines' Quezon City Jail, inmates once followed a strict rule requiring them to sleep in a fixed rotational pattern, head-to-foot positioning in extremely overcrowded cells. No one could switch places without permission. Guards said rotation prevented fights, but prisoners described nights as claustrophobic torture, waking to strangers' breath inches from their faces. The rotation schedule created territorial conflicts and deep discomfort. Many inmates developed insomnia, knowing any accidental position change could trigger punishment. Sleep became a fragile, policed privilege in an already unbearable space. A school in Argentina enforced a surprising rule. Students could not use the color black in any artwork. Teachers claimed the color was emotionally heavy and could attract negativity. Children who used even a small black detail had assignments rejected. Students felt creatively caged, forced into bright palettes regardless of emotion. Art therapists criticized the rule, saying forbidding a fundamental color-distorted expression. Former students recall how the policy shaped their creativity around unnatural limits, making fear, not imagination, the strongest influence on their art. In United Kingdom, a London corporate firm enforced a strict, forced overtime smile rule, requiring employees to smile whenever passing a supervisor, regardless of mood. Hidden cameras monitored hallways, and failing to smile resulted in disciplinary notes. Workers began practicing hallway grins, even during personal crises. Some developed jaw pain from constant tension. The rule sparked outrage after an employee leaked footage of exhausted staff smiling mechanically. It exposed how toxic positivity can become when enforced as a performance rather than genuine human emotion. In Japan, a school in Sapporo implemented a disturbing rule banning students from looking at clocks during class. The idea was to promote full immersion, but students felt trapped in timeless lessons. Teachers covered wall clocks, removed wristwatches, and punished anyone caught glancing at digital screens. Many described the experience as disorienting, losing sense of how long classes dragged on. Parents eventually protested after reports of students experiencing stress, dizziness, and anxiety from time deprivation. The rule blurred education into psychological endurance training. In Australia's Fremantle prison, inmates once followed a chilling rule. No one was allowed to speak for the first 3 weeks of arrival. Guards believed silence reset the mind. New prisoners ate, showered, worked, and slept without uttering a sound. Veterans called it the ghost phase, where men forgot the sound of their own voices. Some reported hallucinations and intense paranoia. The rule wasn't about discipline, it was psychological erosion, designed to break individuality before prisoners fully entered the system's harsh hierarchy. A school in South Africa's Limpopo province enforced a bizarre rule requiring every student to keep their shoes perfectly polished at all times, dust specks included. Monitors inspected footwear hourly, even during recess. Anyone with dull shoes scrubbed them in front of the class while others watched. Teachers claimed shiny shoes built discipline, but children described constant anxiety, especially during rainy seasons. Many carried cloths in their pockets, polishing between lessons. Over time, the rule turned something trivial into a daily ritual of pressure and embarrassment. In Brazil's Manaus industrial zone, one factory enforced a disturbing policy called productivity silence. Workers were forbidden to talk, hum, or whisper during shifts. Supervisors patrolled aisles with microphones to detect noise levels. Even emotional coughs triggered warnings. Management claimed silence improved efficiency, but workers said the rule stripped them of humanity, making the factory feel like a mechanical hive. Some employees developed stress disorders, fearing accidental sounds. National unions eventually intervened, calling the policy a brutal example of corporate dehumanization disguised as discipline. In Japan's Ichihara Girls' High School, students were required to maintain a precise ponytail height, exactly aligned with the top of the ear. Teachers inspected hair with rulers, arguing uniformity prevented attractive distractions. Girls whose ponytails sat too high or low were sent home to fix them. Former students recall humiliation, frustration, and the absurdity of grooming rules tied to academic focus. Critics argued the policy sexualized harmless hairstyles. Yet the school insisted on strict compliance, turning hair placement into a bizarre battleground of control. In Pakistan's Karachi Central Jail, inmates once had to follow a strict, light discipline rule. They were forbidden from blocking, dimming, or covering the overhead lights, even during sleep. Guards believed continuous illumination prevented fights and escape plans. Prisoners described the nightly glare as torture, causing migraines, insomnia, and hallucinations. Some used wet towels over their faces, only to be punished for light interference. The rule turned darkness, a basic human need, into a forbidden luxury, making nights psychologically harsher than the days themselves. A school in Canada's Manitoba region instituted a strange rule banning students from borrowing pencils from each other. The administration believed sharing stationery spread dependency. Teachers tracked pencils with serial numbers and issued detentions for unapproved borrowing. Students said exams felt like minefields. One forgotten pencil meant punishment. The rule disrupted friendships, creating suspicion over simple items. Parents complained that a routine gesture of kindness became criminalized. The policy showed how controlling environments can twist ordinary cooperation into unnecessary discipline. In Ukraine's Lukyanivska prison, inmates once had to rotate daily between 3 mandatory sitting positions, each held for fixed hours. Guards believed frequent posture shifts prevented plotting. Prisoners couldn't lean, slouch, or adjust without permission. The rigid positions caused severe cramps and chronic pain. Former inmates said the rule made time feel distorted, with each hour stretched by discomfort. Many described the experience as psychological warfare disguised as routine management, where the body became a tool for enforcing compliance through controlled suffering. In Indonesia, a rural school enforced a rule requiring students to carry stones in their backpack pockets during class. Teachers claimed the added weight built resilience and discipline. The rocks were inspected daily for size and quantity. Students struggled with back pain, poor posture, and exhaustion. Some swapped stones secretly to ease discomfort, risking punishment if caught. Parents eventually complained after noticing children limping home. The policy, intended to create toughness, instead became a bizarre symbol of misguided discipline disguised as educational philosophy. In United States, a Nevada call center enforced a shocking rule. Employees had to maintain a neutral face at all times, even when off the phone. Smiling without reason was labeled emotional leakage, while frowning counted as workplace negativity. Cameras tracked micro-expressions. Workers practiced emotionless faces during breaks, fearful of penalties. Some described feeling robotic, disconnected from their personalities. The rule revealed how corporate culture can twist human expression into performance, transforming everyday facial movement into a monitored act of compliance. In China's Guangzhou women's prison, inmates were required to fold blankets into razor-sharp rectangles exactly measured to military standards. Guards checked every angle with plastic squares. A single wrinkle meant restarting the process or losing visitation rights. Prisoners described mornings as battles with fabric, where emotional stress accumulated over tiny imperfections. The rule wasn't about cleanliness. It was about reinforcing absolute control. Many inmates later said they couldn't sleep without perfectly folded bedding, proof of how deeply the compulsion carved itself into routine. In Mexico's Santa Marta Acatitla prison, inmates once followed an unsettling grooming rule. All prisoners had to keep their fingernails trimmed to an exact length. No shorter, no longer. Guards measured nails during inspections, claiming irregular lengths encouraged hidden weapons or self-harm. Prisoners described the rule as humiliating and strangely intimate, a way of controlling even the smallest part of their body. Some received punishments for nails that grew too fast or broke accidentally. The policy exposed how obsessive micromanagement becomes psychological suppression. In United States, a Nevada call center enforced a shocking rule. Employees had to maintain a neutral face at all times, even when off the phone. Smiling without reason was labeled emotional leakage, while frowning counted as workplace negativity. Cameras tracked micro-expressions. Workers practiced emotionless faces during breaks, fearful of penalties. Some described feeling robotic, disconnected from their personalities. The rule revealed how corporate culture can twist human expression into performance, transforming everyday facial movement into a monitored act of compliance. In China's Guangzhou women's prison, inmates were required to fold blankets into razor-sharp rectangles exactly measured to military standards. Guards checked every angle with plastic squares. A single wrinkle meant restarting the process or losing visitation rights. Prisoners described mornings as battles with fabric, where emotional stress accumulated over tiny imperfections. The rule wasn't about cleanliness. It was about reinforcing absolute control. Many inmates later said they couldn't sleep without perfectly folded bedding, proof of how deeply the compulsion carved itself into routine. In Mexico's Santa Marta Acatitla prison, inmates once followed an unsettling grooming rule. All prisoners had to keep their fingernails trimmed to an exact length. No shorter, no longer. Guards measured nails during inspections, claiming irregular lengths encouraged hidden weapons or self-harm. Prisoners described the rule as humiliating and strangely intimate, a way of controlling even the smallest part of their body. Some received punishments for nails that grew too fast or broke accidentally. The policy exposed how obsessive micromanagement becomes psychological suppression. In United States, a Michigan manufacturing plant enforced a shocking rule, restricting bathroom visits to exactly 6 minutes per day. Digital timers monitored each worker, and exceeding the limit triggered salary deductions. Employees developed bladder issues, dehydration, and anxiety. Supervisors sometimes followed workers to ensure compliance. Some carried empty bottles to relieve themselves secretly. The rule sparked national outrage when leaked documents revealed management argued bodily needs reduce productivity. It became a disturbing example of how corporate control can overstep human biological necessity. In India's Tihar jail, inmates once followed a strict straight-line movement rule. Prisoners were required to walk only in perfect straight lines, turning at rigid 90-degree angles. Guards punished diagonal steps or curved paths. The rule aimed to reduce chaos, but prisoners said it felt like living on an invisible chessboard. Some developed an unconscious habit of square turning long after release. Psychologists criticized the policy for creating unnatural patterns that rewired spatial awareness through forced, repetitive geometric movement. A school in South Korea implemented a strict mirror inspection hour, requiring students to examine their faces every morning for presentation flaws. Teachers supervised as children checked pores, stray hairs, or uneven skin tones. Anyone failing inspection received grooming assignments or public correction. The rule, intended to instill cleanliness, instead heightened insecurities. Students reported worsening self-esteem and obsessive grooming habits. Parents criticized the school for reinforcing beauty pressure. The mirror hour became a ritual where childhood innocence collided with cosmetic scrutiny. In Russia's Matrosskaya Tishina detention center, inmates were once forbidden from sitting on their beds during daytime. They had to remain standing or sitting on metal stools for hours. Guards claimed beds encouraged laziness, but prisoners described severe leg pain and swelling from prolonged upright positions. Some fainted from exhaustion during heat waves. The rule turned rest, a fundamental human need, into a restricted privilege. Former inmates said the daytime ban felt like time slowed, stretching every hour into a heavy, aching ordeal. A school in Philippines' Cebu City enforced a curious rule requiring students to clap 3 times before speaking in class. Teachers claimed it improved focus and reset the brain. Students had to clap before answering questions, giving presentations, or asking for permission. The ritual became distracting, often interrupting discussions. Some children developed anxiety about clapping incorrectly, fearing punishment. Parents called the rule theatrical and pointless. The policy demonstrated how attempts to enforce attention can morph into unnecessary, stressful performance routines. In United Kingdom, a Welsh company once required employees to begin each shift by shouting a corporate slogan in unison, so loudly that supervisors measured volume with decibel meters. Workers were penalized if their voice lacked enthusiasm. Some developed hoarseness and vocal strain. Employees described mornings as embarrassing group chants, forced positivity masking deep burnout. The rule aimed to create energy, but instead felt cult-like, turning the workplace into a stage where survival meant performing exaggerated loyalty rather than genuine engagement. In Ethiopia's Kaliti prison, inmates once followed a harsh, no lying down during daylight rule. Prisoners had to stand or sit on cold floors from sunrise to sunset, regardless of sickness. Guards claimed lying down signaled weakness. Some inmates fainted during heat spells, only to be forced upright again. The constant strain caused swollen legs, back spasms, and psychological fatigue. Former prisoners said the rule felt like living in a never-ending day, where the body was punished simply for needing rest. A school in Japan's Tokyo prefecture enforced a strict rule banning students from drinking water during class, even in summer. Administrators argued hydration breaks disrupted academic flow. Children endured hours of heat, sweating through uniforms while water bottles sat unused in bags. Some fainted during exams, prompting medical complaints. Parents demanded change after multiple heat-related incidents. Critics said the policy valued discipline over health. The rule turned ordinary thirst into a daily struggle, teaching students endurance rather than well-being. In Greece's Korydallos prison, inmates once had to keep shoes perfectly aligned under their beds, pointing the same direction, spaced exactly 2 finger widths apart. Guards inspected alignment daily, punishing deviations with isolation. Prisoners said the rule wasn't about order, it was about demonstrating constant mental submission. Some became obsessively precise, rechecking alignment dozens of times. Others rebelled quietly, shifting shoes by millimeters to test limits. The ritual highlighted how institutions use meaningless precision to dominate psychological space. A school in Uganda's Kampala district implemented a bizarre silence at sunrise rule. Students arriving early were forbidden to speak until the first bell. Teachers patrolled the courtyard, enforcing absolute quiet. Children waited in stiff lines, unable to greet friends or share morning excitement. The rule aimed to create mental discipline, but students described it as isolating, especially during cold mornings. Many said it set a gloomy tone for the entire day. The enforced silence suppressed natural social warmth and connection. In Poland's Piotrkow Trybunalski prison, inmates once followed a peculiar requirement. Every prisoner had to memorize their cell's exact inventory count, every spoon, cup, blanket, and item. Random checks forced prisoners to recite counts instantly. Mistakes meant cell-wide punishment. The rule created constant anxiety, turning objects into potential threats. Some inmates spent hours rehearsing numbers to avoid collective retaliation. The bizarre system blurred personal responsibility, making everyone accountable for everything, regardless of fault. An oppressive psychological tactic disguised as organization. A school in Malaysia's Sabah region enforced a rule banning students from sitting cross-legged on the floor. Teachers claimed the posture showed disrespect to knowledge. Children had to kneel or sit with legs folded perfectly to the side. Long assemblies caused numbness, cramps, and tears. Students feared moving even slightly, knowing teachers monitored posture harshly. Parents later argued the rule was rooted in outdated customs. For many, the memory of kneeling through hour-long speeches symbolized unnecessary suffering disguised as tradition. In United States, a Florida warehouse introduced an unsettling rule. Workers had to raise their hand and request permission before blowing their nose. Management claimed tissue breaks interrupted workflow. Supervisors denied requests if orders were behind schedule. Employees suffered through congestion, allergies, and colds while waiting for approval. Some were written up for unauthorized nasal clearing. The policy sparked ridicule online after leaked memos surfaced. It highlighted how extreme micromanagement can target even involuntary bodily functions, reducing workers to monitored machines. In Hungary's Szeged prison, inmates once obeyed a rule requiring them to eat meals within a precise 3-minute window. Guards timed every meal, and unfinished food was confiscated immediately. Prisoners described choking, rushing, and swallowing painfully fast to avoid punishment. The rule led to digestive issues and constant stress around mealtime. Some inmates hoarded crumbs secretly to cope with hunger. The policy revealed how something as fundamental as eating can become another mechanism of institutional domination. A school in Brazil's Rio Grande do Sul enforced a baffling rule banning students from using blue ink. Only green pens were allowed, supposedly to stimulate creativity. Teachers confiscated blue pens instantly, even from parents. Students struggled reading green ink on white paper, causing headaches and complaints. Assignments looked identical, draining creative variety instead of enhancing it. Parents criticized the color restriction as pointless and restrictive. The rule ironically limited expression while claiming to promote it. In Japan's Shizuoka Prefecture, a company imposed a rigid arrival uniformity rule. All employees had to enter the building in a single-file line at identical walking speed. Supervisors watched security footage, penalizing anyone too fast or slow. Workers described mornings as robotic parades, stripped of individuality. Conversations stopped and people rehearsed steps outside the gate to avoid mistakes. The rule, framed as collective harmony, instead created suffocating conformity, turning a normal office entrance into a daily performance of manufactured unity.